Hi, this is Kowski, and in this video, we're going to be looking at the developments during the American Revolutionary War. So let's get right into it. And basically here you see key point 3.12, Roman numeral 2, and the gist of it to simplify it and boil it down to its most simplest theme here. The colonists got mad and united because they saw Britain's policies as being unfair. And of course, you know the context with a lot of the acts that were passed, everything from the Stamp Act to the Tea Act to the Sugar Act to the Townshend Act to the Declaratory Act. So a lot of this is economic in nature, but of course this is a political fight for the colonists to have self-government. Remember, you had a period of salutary neglect where the colonists are governing themselves, and now suddenly that is no longer happening, and the colonists are going to be going up against the British. So let's first start with the Continental Congress, the first one in the summer, or just in September of 1774 in Philadelphia. You have 56 delegates coming together through the committees of correspondence, and that's of course to foster communication. But notice the theme of unity here as you're bringing the colonists from all colonies together. And of course, this is going to follow the Intolerable Acts, and they're even going to draft the Declaration of Colonial Rights, and they're even going to form the Association, where colonies are going to be agreeing to boycott completely British goods. So this is really groundbreaking and revolutionary with the fact that the colonists are coming together. And also note, as I've said in the earlier screencast, the Join or Die cartoon, as even though this had more of a relevance during the 1750s with the French and Indian War, now it's resurfacing to get the colonies to unite in various forums leading up to the American Revolutionary War. So it's interesting how this returns, and again, notice how this pieces of the snake are disjointed, and of course, going from New England down to South Carolina, the idea being that the colonists have to come together to essentially defeat the British, or metaphorically die, in the sense that they would never get the full rights that Englishmen enjoy. So, we're going to eventually lead to, all-out war. We're on the verge of this, and Britain is really not doing anything to alleviate any of the tension between it and its colonies. You'll see colonial men even openly drilling in military fashion. There will be paranoia amongst the British troops stationed in Boston, to the point that the British military operations are put in place to capture dangerous military colonials who may have arsenals, and there's rumors that they're stockpiling it. Well, of course, this is where you have the famous Paul Revere ride, and you're going to have 8 colonists killed in the quote-unquote Battle of Lexington. It's more of a skirmish. They don't even know who fired the first shot. It's so minor, but nevertheless, they're going to go on the Concord to find an empty arsenal, and that is also a failed attempt to capture prominent leaders of those against the British, such as Paul Revere. But of course, this arsenal is empty, and they are attacked by colonists, and the British are forced to retreat. So this is a very early victory in a very minor sense, but the Battle of Lexington and Concord are barely battles. Some even refer to them as just simply a skirmish. But nevertheless, reinforcements are sent, and this is leading to the development of further and worsening tensions. So quite some problems going on there. And here you see a closer look here as you have the British troops going closer to Lexington. Then they go to Concord. Of course, you have the American attack, and they are forced to retreat. The British, of course, are going to send in more reinforcements. Now, you know the end of the story here, that the colonists are going to win, but let's get into as to why this is. Well, colonists are going to accumulate some victories, and particularly after the Battle of Saratoga, that's considered the turning point. That's going to give the French enough confidence that they can join a side that's going to defeat the British. You'll even get the help of the Prussian drill master, Frederick von Steuben, who's going to be very important in terms of training the colonial troops. On top of that, even though the British are wealthier, they are indebted and they are overextended in their empire. They also have less of a will for to control these colonies. Even one political party in Great Britain, known as the Whig Party, would even openly cheer after the colonists would win battles, because they could care less about this war. They see this war as being very expensive. They see these colonies, in terms of maintaining them and having these British troops there, as very expensive as well. You also have the French looking to get back at the British. Remember that the French were expelled from the North American continent as a result of the Treaty of Paris following the French and Indian War. So they're looking to get back at the British. So you also have, on top of that too, the British even having issues in other parts of their empire. So all of these facts together, it wasn't so much that the colonists were wealthier and had all these abundant resources, is that the British did not have as much of a will, even though they were much wealthier. So the fact that the colonists are much more motivated and they'll eventually get those resources from the French will be quite important. Now, if you see here this particular quote here, this is from William Franklin, who is the son, of course, of the infamous Benjamin Franklin. And Franklin's son, even believe it or not, had loyalty to the British crown. And it's important to note that there was never a majority of colonial Americans that are going to unite behind the cause of independence. So Ben Franklin's own son, who was once the colonial governor of New Jersey, had a dispute with his father, of course, being Ben Franklin, and they never mended fences. So you definitely had a decent number of loyalists in the colonies that were never going to be united against this fight for independence. So something interesting there. So eventually, after Lexington and Concord, John Adams is going to become forward as the leader. He's going to be coming up with some proposals, including that each colony should set up its own government. And in addition, he's going to say that they're going to need to declare independence. And that's where that idea is going to come about. At this point, he's sort of a lone voice in the wilderness. Members of the Continental Congress are even hoping and holding out for a reconciliation of the colonies in Britain, mending fences. But Adams certainly sees the writing on the wall, and that this was not going to stop. Tensions have already been heightened, and either the colonies get crushed and put down as colonial subjects, or they're going to have to seal the deal and win independence. So certainly you're going to see specific voices emerging at the Second Continental Congress. They're going to be forming the Continental Army, and of course they're going to have Washington as their leader. And this is going to eventually sow the seeds eventually for the Declaration of Independence, only about a year away. So you see a lot of this discontent and a lot of unity beginning to come about during these times. And again, war still technically has not been declared. You've just been having a series of skirmishes and battles. But the next major battle that you're going to have, and it's going to be actually the deadliest of the American Revolutionary War, was the Battle of Bunker Hill. Technically, it wasn't Bunker Hill. The correct name is Breed's Hill. You don't need to know that, but that's an FYI. But things are progressing at this point. They're getting worse and worse. And you have a British attack, and ultimately the British are going to win. But this is a moral victory for the colonists because it's showing the British weaknesses. It creates a situation in which the British lose about 1,000 men, colonists only about 450, and they only lose this particular battle because they ran out of supplies. And you see that, the colonists are very much capable of defeating the British at this particular battle and gives them some self-confidence. So this is a big moral victory. Now, when you compare that you had about 1,500 people, and this being the deadliest war, certainly that's not really any major number when you compare it to some of the losses of World War I and World War II, sometimes in a matter of 10 minutes, thanks to things like the machine gun. But this is actually the deadliest battle. But even though this is technically a win for the British, it is also considered a win for the Americans in the sense that it's a moral victory, that they are showing themselves as capable. Believe it or not, though, some colonists are still hoping for a reconciliation between the mother country and the colonies. The Continental Congress will even ask for peace and reconciliation, known as the Olive Branch Petition, where they're asking for a return to peace, saying, yes, at Bunker Hill, we killed many of you, but we still technically lost. Can we amend? And the king is basically going to say, drop dead. And at this point, you have more escalating tension. So we're coming really to a breaking point here. Now, one person who's going to be highly influential is a man named Thomas Paine. He's actually an immigrant from England, and he's going to be attacking King George III and saying that the colonies are never going to be allowed to be themselves, and that is basically, hence the name, common sense to declare independence. And this is one of the most infamous and famous publications that's going to spread amongst all of the colonies. And essentially any literate colonist would be able to read it, would have heard about it, and this is going to be absolutely important in spreading the idea of independence. 500,000 copies for this point is very influential. So you might, go to the cliche saying that the pen indeed is mightier than the sword, because it's going to, again, unite more and more colonists against the British. So ultimately, Americans are going to begin choosing sides. You're going to have those that are loyalists, those who, of course, are going to be loyal to the king, versus the patriots who are going to be loyal to the homeland and want independence. Again, you're not going to get a majority of patriots really at any time during the Revolutionary War. You certainly have a sizable number of loyalists, and you even have cases in which people who were colonists joining the British side, and their families are fighting against each other, similar to the Civil War. So again, it was not that everybody ever came fully together, so keep that in the back of your mind. This eventually will lead to the Declaration of Independence, and as a result, you're going to have this being declared officially on July 4th, 1776, and once this is declared, the War for Independence would need to be fought. So at this point, there's no going back. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's very methodically laid. You start out with Enlightenment ideas in your introduction, followed by a number of grievances that are specifically attacking King George. Although the name King George III never actually appears in the grievance section, they just keep using the word he. But of course, King George III, when reading that, would know it's directed towards him. And then in the very bottom, you have the conclusion where they're officially breaking from Britain. And this is an all-out war now against Great Britain. So just to keep this in mind with respect to the Declaration, the logistics and ideas here, Jefferson is going to basically be attributed as the major author, writing the Declaration of Independence, signed by delegates of all 13 colonies. Think about unity here. He even is going to include a section about anti-slavery. However, this is actually going to be deleted in an attempt to get South Carolina and Georgia to get on board. So there are many drafts, believe it or not, of this. And of course, South Carolina and Georgia rely heavily on slavery. And this is important, particularly for the plantation economy. So slavery was in the draft, but it is going to be taken out. And as I said earlier, John Locke's ideas of natural rights, life, liberty, property, very, very much influential. And this is certainly considered the first foundational document of the very, very young United States. So that's where we're going to end with that at this juncture in the American Revolutionary War.